Good afternoon, guys. Welcome to today's live stream, our daily, I should say weekly live stream. Um, so, like I mentioned before, I wanted to go over a few. Of course, I'm going to be doing announcements every live stream now to sort of explain what's going on with my business um, and any promotions or offers that I have going on at the moment. Um, any sort of events, anything of that nature, I'm gonna do in every live stream that I do every Wednesday. So as far as today, there really isn't a whole lot to discuss as far as announcements. I did want to reiterate again. We're coming up in the middle of not November. We're coming up in the middle of December. Today's the 14th, so we're coming up in the middle. And I wanted to mention again that I am still offering 50% off all my online fitness programs. Um, any sort of commitment level, whether it be 3, 6, or 12 months, it's all 50% off. Everything is included. You get Trainerized, which is where you track your workouts, where you track your measurements, metrics, everything of that sort. And you also get Evolution Nutrition. As I've mentioned previously, it's basically a meal planning service. You can search recipes, be able to track macros and things of that nature. So it's kind of all included in my all access online fitness program. So any commitment level, it's all 50% off for the whole month of December. If I do have any changes coming in the next month, it's likely that I will have some particular promotion for January. I haven't decided that, of course, just yet. But if that does happen, of course, I'll announce it here to you guys. But again, 50% off the whole month, or 50% off. You get 50% off the program. Any sort of commitment level, 3, 6, or 12 months, you have 50% off for that whole duration that you're in the program. But the promotion lasts the whole month of December. So I had to clear that up a little bit. Um, so as far as that's concerned, um, that's pretty much the main thing with promotions and things of that nature. I will, of course, be continuing these live streams every Wednesday at 12. I'm probably going to stay at 12 p.m. for a while. And I think that's pretty much it as far as announcements. I don't really have anything in particular. I mentioned about the Facebook stars last week. You guys pretty much probably know all about that as far as giving. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it as far as announcements are concerned. If anything else comes up, I'll be sure to let you guys know. But let's go ahead and get into today's live stream. And we're going to be talking about applying the OPT model. So you may have heard me talk about the OPT model before. And some of you guys may not know exactly what that means. The OPT model, because I am certified through the National Academy of Sports Medicine, it is the model that I go by when it relates to my fitness programming and my fitness training. It is basically the blueprint of how I create workouts and create programs for clients. So that's what I'm going to be discussing is how the OPT model applies to a specific goal that you have. Because there's so many ways that a program can be designed depending on your goals. And I've pretty much mentioned this in the past, but depending on what your particular goal is, if you're wanting to reduce body fat or if you're wanting to gain lean muscle, the training method is going to be different. It's not going to be the same. It's all goal based, pretty much, to sum it up completely. But what I want to do is sort of discuss a little bit about how the program is broken up depending on your specific goal and how the OPT model applies to that. Alrighty, so in the past, I've discussed a little bit about the OPT model, but I'm going to do a short review of it for you guys who may have not watched my live streams or may not have heard me sort of discuss what the OPT model is. Again, the OPT model is from the National Academy of Sports Medicine, which is where I got my certification as a personal fitness trainer and a virtual coaching specialist. So there's different phases as it relates to the OPT model, and I'm going to sort of discuss these. Just in a simplified form, I'm not going to go into huge detail because I've went through these before, but I'm going to do it in a simplified way. So the OPT model is the guidelines from the National Academy of Sports Medicine on how a workout program should follow to create a progressive and systematic outcome of a client's specified goal. So you go through, there's basically 5 separate phases. So you have the stabilization endurance phase, which, to sort of explain it in simple terms, is basically the phase where you're doing more posture-based exercises, you're doing more stability-based exercises, balance, things of that nature. It's basically to build up sort of your basic baseline fitness so that you can progressively move on to more advanced exercises. And it's any client that I have will always start out with the stabilization phase because it is the core phase. You know, it's basically the foundation to getting started with your program. Usually this phase, it kind of varies in duration, but it'll last likely 4 weeks or so. Again, it kind of varies. Some clients it may be shorter, some clients may be longer, and that goes for all of these phases. But that's basically what the stabilization endurance phase is, just the baseline phase, the starting phase, the foundation. You know, building up your muscle. You know, preparing your muscles, your joints to go into more heavier exercises, more I guess just to progress forward. So the next phase you go into is the strength endurance phase. Again, this is just a progression from stabilization endurance. You will still do stabilization based exercises regardless if you're moving to the strength endurance phase, because stabilization has to be done. It is key. And when you're working so many different muscles, you have to constantly challenge those muscles. So as you progress, when you start out, you're going to start primarily in the stabilization endurance phase, and then you're going to move to the strength endurance phase. But you're going to go back and forth. So you're going to start with stabilization endurance and go to strength endurance. So again, like I mentioned before, depending on your goals, you're going to go either back or forth. It just depends. And you're not going to go through all these phases. So based on your goals. So the next phase would be muscular development. And of course, when you're going into these more higher phases, these phases are going to be primarily geared towards people who have like performance-based goals, or weightlifting, bodybuilding based goals. The higher you go into these phases, the more it's going to focus on that. Muscular development can relate to somebody who's just wanting to build lean muscle. When you get to maximal strength, that's likely for somebody who's wanting to do performance-based, is focusing on performance-based goals or sports-specific goals. And the same with power. So again, this is just trying to sum up these 5 phases, and this is all the basis of how your workout program is structured if you are a client of mine. Now, you have these main phases, but they're separate stages. So when you look at the stages, so it's like steps, which I've sort of shown before. So you've got 3 stages here. You've got level 1, which is the stabilization phase. Stabilization endurance is the only phase in that level 1. You move to strength, level 2 strength. In this particular step or stage includes the strength endurance, muscular development, and maximal strength phase. Those 3 phases are included in the level 2 stage. And the level 3 stage is like stabilization endurance. It only has one specific phase, and it's the phase 5, which is power. So again, if you want to learn more about this, I can explain it a little bit more into detail. And I have done a couple live streams in the past discussing the OPT model. So I don't want to stay too long on this, but I do want to sum it up in a way to where you understand sort of where I'm going with, applying this model to a workout program. Alrighty, so what we're going to get into is applying the LPT model to increasing lean muscle mass. So everything from here on out is going to talk about how the LPT model relates to your specific goals. So when reaching this specific goal, a training program should be progressed to higher volumes to force muscles to regenerate. With this goal in mind, you will likely cycle through the first 4 phases of the OPT model. So let's go ahead and sort of look at how this would sort of play out. So what I've got here is an example plan as it relates to focusing on lean muscle mass. So if your goal is to focus on lean muscle mass, this is basically an outline or an example of how your program is going to look annually and how it's going to look on a month-to-month basis. So let me make sure I've got this. All right, so okay. So there's a separate, there's a hiccup here. So with this monthly, this actually is not for the lean muscle mass. I thought this looked wrong, but this monthly phase does not include for the lean muscle mass. So I actually accidentally made a hiccup on this one. So let's look only at the annual phase here, the annual plan. So with this annual plan, this gives you an example of the lean muscle mass goal and what it looks like if that is your program that you're focusing on that particular goal. So in January, you're going to start out with the stabilization phase, like I said, for about 4 weeks, and then you're going to move into strength for the next couple of months. And with the strength phase, you see that it's got phase 2. So this is the strength endurance phase in February, and then you've got muscular development phase 3 in March, and then you've got 4 maximal strength in April. And then you're going back up in May, you're going to go into the strength endurance, and then you're going to go into the muscular development phase in June, maximal strength in July, and it sort of, it goes back and forth when it relates to that specific goal. I apologize to you guys because this monthly that I've got down here is actually for a separate goal. I've got that confused. But this annual plan is specifically based on a lean muscle mass goal. So let's go ahead and move on. When you apply the LPT model for body fat reduction. So again, like I mentioned before, it's going to be completely different when you're focusing on, losing body fat. It's not going to be the same as, wanting to build lean muscle. So when focusing on body fat reduction, the primary focus would be to expend more calories than being consumed, and move more through structured activity as well as daily physical activity. So for this phase, you would have the stabilization and strength phase, as well as implementing cardio into your workouts. So let's look at an example of this. I'm pretty sure I've got this annual monthly correct here. So this is an example plan focusing on body fat reduction. So when we're looking at an annual plan, let me make sure here. Okay. I just want to make sure one thing that I've got these calendars right, because there's certain things where I've got mixed up. Okay, so I want to apologize again, guys, because I've gotten these calendars somewhat mixed up. So I completely apologize. So for this annual one, and this is my fault because I've got them sort of confused by each phase. So let's go back. Let's sort of start from let's or start from the beginning, and let's not look at the calendars because I've got them totally mixed up because I've got so many that I've got as an example, and I'm not putting them in the correct area. So I apologize to you guys about that, but I want to clear this up and explain these the way they're supposed to be explained. So when we're looking at an annual plan for body fat reduction, again, it's going to be separate from lean muscle mass. So in January, you would be doing the stabilization phase. In February, you would be moving into the strength phase. So basically, the way this one works is you're going to do the first 3 phases, and instead of moving into phase 4, so in the lean muscle mass. So for example, with this one, you start in January with stabilization endurance, you move into February doing strength endurance, you move into March doing muscular endurance. But then in April, you go back to stabilization endurance, and you go back down to strength endurance in May, and then in June, you go into muscular development. So that's pretty much how that works out as far as it relates to fat loss. But then in July, you actually will be doing all 3 phases for the rest of the year, as well as including cardio into your workouts. So that's pretty much an example of what an annual plan looks like as it relates to body fat reduction. So again, I want to apologize to you guys about these calendars because I got them completely mixed up. And that is my fault. But I know exactly what I'm supposed to be explaining to you guys as far as these particular goals. Next time I will be sure to correct that. Because that is my fault because I thought I had them in the right spot. So, but anyways, let's go ahead and move on to this last goal that I'm going to talk about today. And this is going to be the goal as it relates to improving sports performance. So again, like I've mentioned previously, when it comes to these goals, they're all going to be separate, that you're not going to move in the phases the same way. So focusing on improving sports performance primarily focuses on increasing endurance, strength, and power output. So cycling through the stages of stabilization, strength, and power are going to be the outline of this specific goal. Let me see if I've got this correct. I might have this one correct. Okay, so this one is correct. So let's look at this one here. I have a good example for you guys. I apologize, that was my fault. I'm not going to get over that now because I feel bad that I didn't have that correct. But again, I'll fix that next time. I think it's just I got sidetracked and I didn't correct that, but I will in the next presentation make sure I got everything right. So with these examples here, these are all correct. So the example plan related to improving sports performance. So for this one, you have January, your first phase, like before, like in all the previous sort of examples we've looked at. January, you're going to start with stabilization. In February, you're going to move to the strength stage and go into phase 2, which is the strength endurance phase. But then you get into March, and what's included here is you're going to be working through not only the stabilization, or not only the strength phase like in February, but you're also going to have the stabilization phase, the strength phase, the stabilization endurance phase, strength endurance phase, as well as the power phase, as well as cardio. So cardio is kind of a separate section here. But again, it depends on your particular goals. So some days you wouldn't be doing cardio, and some days you would. That would be the primary focus. So with this is focusing specifically on performance. So again, let me sort of explain what power means. Power is basically focusing on basically speed, quickness, agility, and reaction. Like SAQ training, like I mentioned in the past, it's more focused on, just the performance, reaction, endurance based exercises. That's basically what the power phase is. Not a lot of people would go through that phase. Like if you're focusing on, say you're like an athlete, like you may be doing like football or soccer or any kind of sport, you would likely go into the power phase because that would be important, because you want to have a good reaction, a good agility, great quickness to react, and speed. So that's primarily what the power phase is focused on. So to reiterate here, so with January you've got stabilization, with February you've got strength, and then when you get into March you've got going into stabilization, strength, as well as power, and doing cardio. So when you look at this in a monthly basis, so looking at it more from days and weeks, so this is just giving you just a simple example. So like for this first week of January, you've got you're doing the stabilization phase here on Monday, on Wednesday, and on Friday. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the second week. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the third week. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the fourth week. As well as doing cardio the same days that you're doing that phase. Those would pretty much be your workout days. So that's somebody that's working out 3 days a week. That's a 3-day-a-week plan. And you're doing that for 4 months. So, for 4 weeks. So in February, it's likely going to be the same, except you're doing strength, if that makes sense. So this pretty much just sums up and gives you a basic idea of how a plan is structured. And that's what I sort of wanted to explain, sort of how this is broken down related to specific goals. Alrighty. So thank you guys for watching this. I do really want to apologize for not having some of the correct calendars in here. That was my fault. I got kind of confused on what was what, but I did correct it, and I knew which ones were wrong. So if there's any questions from you guys, please let me know. I'll be sure to correct any of those. I did explain it though the correct way. It may not, in the presentation it wasn't correct in some of the forms, but I wanted to explain it in the correct way, so I didn't want to get off here until I explained it correctly, and I didn't want to look over it. So I hope that you guys sort of get an understanding of how the OPT model works, of how it's structured, and it's really, without looking at any of those calendars or without looking at the plans themselves, it's really simple. You're just going through a progressive and systematic, sort of going through phases, basically just progressing to, when you're getting stronger, you move to the next phase, basically. And again, based on your specific goals, you're not going to do the same phases. And that's like with performance. They're going to focus more, if you got somebody that's focusing on performance goals, they're going to do more power-based stuff, more quickness and speed. you got somebody that's focusing on building lean muscle mass, they're going to be doing more strength and, maximal strength stuff, more, weightlifting, things of that sort. And then when you go to, losing body fat, they're going to focus on stabilization, but also strength endurance as well as cardio. So again, it just sort of depends. And each of these models all work as long as you follow how it, your plan, it's going to work. You just have to stay consistently with it each day that is the day that you're supposed to work out. So I wanted to explain that to you guys. I do really apologize for some of the incorrect things I had in here. I'm gonna work on fixing that. Like I said, I think I got sidetracked because there's a lot of stuff I've kind of been juggling, but I'll make sure in the next presentation that I will get everything correct that's supposed to be correct in the right place. But I did explain it to you guys the right way. It just didn't look right on the screen. So thank you guys for understanding. And if you have any questions about what I've discussed today and you want to know more, feel free to reach out to me. I've got my contact information here, my email, as well as my phone number. You can text me. If you do text me, just make sure you tell me exactly who you are and what you're asking. That's one of the things, because sometimes I get numbers that I don't know, and usually I don't reply to them. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have for you guys today. Just let me know if you need anything, or if you have any questions on anything I've discussed today or any previous live stream. I'll be willing to answer those questions. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys likely next Wednesday in the next live stream I do.